Hello everybody, it's the Magical One here, and today I'm doing another Magical Mumble, and today my guest is Anatoly Shashkin, who is also better known as DOS Nostalgia, or DOS Nostalgic, depending on where you're looking, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, you do a YouTube show, a podcast, you also have done blogs on DOS Nostalgia, and you're also very active on Twitter with a huge following on Twitter as well. I think that it's a very similar number of followers to Twitter and YouTube, where you've got over 13,000 followers on each platform individually as well. So I obviously wanted to get you on the show because I'm actually a huge fan of DOS games. When I was a kid, I lived in America for 3 years. Although you were born in Russia, you live in Long Island, New York, so in terms of having a lot of, for myself, my own personal DOS nostalgia, it comes from a childhood living in America where I got my first PC, a Packard Bell PC, after having a Dragon 32 for a very long time, and so that was kind of where my roots for, but I would kind of want to find out where yours come from, where your love of DOS gaming and DOS tech comes from.
Well, like you said, I was born in Russia, and that's where I lived most of my life. But my love of technology kind of just I don't know happened. It's basically when I was very little, when I was a kid in the still USSR at that point. The computers weren't available to like the regular mortals sort of thing. So they were in either like organizations, and most of all they were like in those places called science research universities, essentially institutes of technology.
Okay.
And people use them, mathematicians, physicists, whoever, all kinds of technicians. And I distinctly sort of remember the moment of when my mother's boyfriend at the time worked at one of those places, and like we're going in. He took us to that place, and I remember going to like a lower level. It was like dark, like all the old Soviet buildings at that point were like falling apart. The economy was going to hell, and but people still worked there. And I remember going into this sort of room full of machinery, humming noise, and my mom's boyfriend was like, "Hey, like, you there?" Like, he called out to somebody, and in the corner of the room there was like a light emitting. There was this guy with
this sounds terrifying.
Turned around, and he was like, "Yes, I'm here." But it was just so fascinating. And I saw the sort of like phosphorus monochrome, monitor outputting graphics and the shell and everything. And from there, it was already fascinating. And I just played a couple of games on computers in the very early years, and like I sort of like it I understood somehow as a kid. It was very apparent to me that it was a machine that like people gave instructions to, like I didn't know like how like TV was made or anything. TV and everything was magic, but for some reason computers just made sense from like technical point of view. And like I knew people who like gave instructions to them were programmers, and like I think at one point, like I remember seeing, I forget the exact circumstances, but I think it was some kind of a class trip also very early on, maybe first grade, and they showed us a computer lab, and there was like a demo where like a spherical clown face was like rotating. It was all just made of spheres, sort of like what ecstatic ended up being, like the sort of just ellipsoids, and it was just rotating in 360, like all very colorful, and that was just all I could think at that point in time. Was just like, I want to do that. Like that's what I wanted to do. So it just came naturally. And of course, as a kid, games, computers, and what's better than technology, and you can play games on it. So that's pretty much where it all originated.
That's cool though, because like I think a lot of younger kids would have experienced something like that, and that would fuel their nightmares for years. Not only the dark utilitarian building with somebody hiding in the corner with a strange light, but also things like the first experience of a spinning clown head. I mean, many people.
It
sounds
cute.
like something
it was not frightening.
Okay, cool. But that's cool that you had such a a unique experience there compared to the majority of people anyway, of experiencing that kind of large scale utilitarian computer world, and seeing it as kind of like a factory kind of scenario.
Yeah, more like a research lab, really. Like there was stuff there that I'm sure was there from like the 50s, some of that stuff. So
Wow.
it just like, well, I mean, the scale, of course, now I can't compare the scale because I was like this big then. So it's I'm sure it was all quite smaller as well, but it just looked like a corridor full of junk, and some of it was actually plugged in, some of it wasn't,
Yeah.
and I don't know what they were actually doing there. I have no idea if it was some kind of math division or physics division. I really don't know. Something it had to have some kind of a practical application, but they sure did play a lot of games. So
Do you think it's something that you could find out what they were doing?
not anymore. I don't think
Uh,
it would require me at least working on the spot. Like finding out remotely would be really difficult. Finding out
yeah.
locally, probably, maybe I could
Oh,
probably
okay.
track down a few people and find out what like that building. I'm sure was taken over a long time ago by I don't know, like a sports complex or something that could use giant rooms with big windows and stuff. But I'm pretty sure I can like find out what was there before. But yeah, I never actually bothered to track it down. It's better as like this hazy memory in my head from a long time ago. So from 2 countries back. So it's that. I think I will just leave it as that. So I got a story to tell.
So now you're in Long Island, New York. I mean, obviously you're running a successful YouTube channel and your other social medias as well, and your podcast. Is that all your full-time job, or do you work as well as
No,
that?
no. I actually I have a full-time job as a in well I've been in retail for a while, but for the past 12 years, I've been in supermarkets. So I'm actually a supermarket manager. As it turned out, my life didn't really connect with the technology in a job sort of way. But so that's my full time job. I work a lot of hours. I work a lot of overtime,
Things
and in
that
my spare time, I do all the dust stuff.
But that's the thing. I think it's quite common. You see a lot of people in, especially in things like YouTube and things like that. I think a lot of kids see YouTubers and social media people and assume it's their bread and butter, their 9 to 5 job. When in reality, the majority of them have fairly mundane or sort of 9 to 5 jobs where they need to support themselves, and it's the passion and drive for their hobbies that that mean that they continue to make this kind of content that entertains people, and it's that passion and drive which I find fascinating, which is why I like doing these kinds of interviews. So I think it's cool that you have this double life where you're working in management in one side, and then the other side is this creative world where you put out media and entertainment for the masses. And yeah, it's interesting to have that switch.
I don't find it a double life, mainly because like I do a lot of my, I'm most active on Twitter, and Twitter is essentially what sort of gave me, I think the platform that YouTube or anything else couldn't give me. Just like, I could just randomly shout something into the internet void and get a response. So like this is where dust nostalgia mostly happens. It's from this old beat up phone. While I'm at work most of the time, majority of my Twitter feed is unprepared and it's just whatever happens to pop into my head. That's what I love about Twitter. It's sort of like uh, uh, you have to be brief. So like a
Yeah.
simple thought, and you sort of get it out. And to some people like enjoy listening to my like half insane ramblings. So that's good. So that's fine. And if they're not interested, they're not going to listen. Like nobody's forcing them. So that's also good.
But
Yeah.
you inspire a lot of people, though. I've seen, because I started following your Twitter handle because I was actually looking up things for one of my favorite DOS games when I was a kid, which is Lands of Lore: The Throne of
Mhm.
Chaos,
Yeah,
the
very good.
first Lands of Lore game, and you had posted up something about it, or it might have been Dungeon Master, and I responded to it with posting up about Lands of Lore, and then I just started following, and just you kept posting up so many gems of games, and I was like, oh, I remember playing that, and it's somehow been lost from my memory playing those games
Right.
as a kid, and you kept posting up things. It's like, I remember playing that game and that game and that game. But it's not, you don't just tend to post up your thoughts and memories. You engage a lot with the people that you follow.
I do. That's what I always wanted. That's what I started DOS Nostalgia for, and it never really happened for years until I got to Twitter, and not only until I got to Twitter, but then until one day just started posting a lot, a lot of random stuff, and I used to sort of, and what happened is a lot of random stuff got feedback, and I was like, so I just started talking to people, and that's why I loved Twitter for so long. I mean, uh, let's be honest here, Twitter's became kind of iffy place the last few years, but for the
Sometimes,
for
yeah,
the
but
for the first like several years, it was nothing but joy to me. I would just like, it was really amazing. So so that's that, and yeah, I like Twitter is essentially what I try to put out the most stuff, and not try, but it's so much easier. I don't have to sit down really play the games or edit anything or put together any kind of a video. Those things take time, but like I have a pretty big screenshot archive. I can I read a lot about DOS games. I remember a lot about DOS games. So those things don't really take time for me to sort of like put out that sort of content, and that's also happens to be the content I get the most feedback back. So to me, it's just a lot more enjoyable to do that.
I would say that in terms of your call and response on Twitter, it's one of those things where you genuinely seem to have a community of followers. Not just people who
Yes, it
you've got
turned
some
out
casual
that
ones,
way.
but you've got a lot of people who interact with each other as well. And I think it's uh, you saying about sometimes Twitter does end up being a field of nonsense, but there are pockets of people who kind of band together, and I think you've genuinely managed to create that, a bunch of people who genuinely love DOS games and
Well, that's the
retro
thing.
gaming, and
I mean,
that's
who
beautiful.
else? And I used to tweet a lot. Like now, I've sort of slowed down. But like, let's see, if you rewind maybe 2-3 years ago, there used to be like I used to average, I don't know, like 100 tweets a day. But nowadays, people would just like block me, probably. But it's like there's only very few specific people who are like willing to be like, yes, yes, I'll sign up for 100 DOS tweets a day. Like amongst sandwiched amongst all the other stuff.
Uh,
So well, turned out to be a few thousand people like that. So essentially, it becomes a community just by design, right? Like
yeah.
if anybody likes DOS games that much, they might as well stick around, and then they'll end up seeing, because I retweet a lot as well. Like I love when people send in their stuff. And I used to have that thing. I don't really do that anymore, but I'm planning on returning it in one form or the other, where I would do morning DOS talk, where I would put up a daily topic, and people would write in their stuff, and I would just retweet everything for like 5 hours. And people get to know other people who, guess what? They also don't mind looking at hundreds DOS tweets a day. And that's how the community grew. Yes. So like I am all about sort of feedback and response in that way, because that's essentially why I started DOS Nostalgia. I wanted to talk to people who also like DOS games, and it just took a few years to get there.
So, in terms of DOS games as a specific focus, not just it's not just a retro game thing that you look at, but there's a lot of specifically DOS based
Yes.
programming things. Why is that? Is that just because of the period of your childhood, or
Yes.
what?
When I was young and actually had a PC, and when my friends had PCs, and PCs were everywhere, in Soviet Union, post-Soviet space, that was the number one gaming platform apart from the Taiwanese knockoffs of Famicoms. Um, so yeah, so it was number one platform. So we all played it, and because of piracy, I played as many games as possible. So I have quite a bit of memories from that time. And also, it's an open platform. Besides the thousands of commercial releases, we don't even know. So a lot of them are lost. Like how many shareware releases there are from just people in their bedrooms and offices and whatnot, and small teams. And so even if, just between that, I don't want to expand my focus because I think I have enough to talk about for the rest of my life, to be honest. So like, really, I don't think any of it was ever going to get covered. So like, I don't need to talk about other stuff. Like I know a lot about this stuff, and I still can learn about this stuff. There's so much stuff about DOS that and DOS gaming and just DOS in general that I don't know yet.
Yeah.
So like, there's enough for me to sort of like expand my own horizons and yet keep the things that I talk about somewhat contained. So I'm fine with it. And the reason why is just because I happen to play like tons of DOS games a long time ago.
Well, this thing I've noticed, especially on things like your YouTube channel, you end up covering not only DOS games, which a lot of people would have seen, but you tend to find things that people wouldn't have seen. Things like localized Russian releases of first-person shooters, which people generally Western world would not have seen, and things like that. So is that just from memories, or do you actually go digging for a lot of this stuff as well?
A lot of it is from memory. Like I didn't have to go dig for localized Russian shooters because I have them on CDs right next to me, and I've had them forever. So that's it. Just something, but I also think it's something that's interesting to people who didn't grow up in Russia. So I always wanted to sort of showcase that. But I do go digging in general, just for stuff, because again, we don't know how much stuff is out there. Nobody knows, and it's interesting to find out like real obscure stuff, because everybody knows about the famous stuff, right? And that stuff was never going to go away. Nobody's going to forget that Doom ever existed, right? But there are games that are lost, and also there are games in those pockets of internet, and not just games, programs as well, software that may be sitting there but nobody knows about. So that's interesting to see. And just interesting to see how things evolved when you look at software and stuff like that. So I was last year. Last year I put out the whatchamacallit, on the Internet Archive. You can see most of the Big Blue disc. They're missing some, but I put out a whole run from like 86 to 98 that you can look in your browser, and that's not all of it is culturally relevant, right? Yeah. But this is quite a lot to see that sort of stuff. I had to dig for some of it, but I'm glad something came out of it, and like you can go and use your phone because it's on the Internet Archive, and use your phone to like browse Big Blue Disc. I mean, you probably have to have a keyboard to do that, but either way, you can use your internet connected device to sort of like see like bunch of IBM PC games that John Romero made like before id Software and stuff, and like all other kinds of stuff, like little CGA animations and programs that will tell you that drugs are bad, and just bunch of stuff that nobody even thinks about anymore. So
but it's history.
It's absolutely is history. It's absolutely is history that needs to be preserved, and it's not being preserved.
Well, that's the thing. You see a lot of things like there's the online series of kids react to and elders react to and things like that with big YouTube series, and they show them things like old DOS PCs and sort of 386 PCs and stuff like that, where they don't realize that you have to turn like the computer on at the back of the computer. Just
right.
There's things like when you go shut down on the early versions of Windows, like Windows 3.1 and things like that, it tells you it is now safe to turn off your computer, and they're looking at it, staring at the screen, going, "Well, why doesn't it just turn itself off?" And it's just that technology has moved on so quickly in the world of computers that we are now in a scenario where a lot of the younger generations aren't aware of where it's come from. And that's a really strange place to be in. And I think you're right. I think preserving that's very important.
I don't know. I was talking mostly about preservation of software. I don't think...
Oh, yeah.
Well, first of all, I don't know. If you asked me when I was 7 years old about how like the first telephone worked, I probably couldn't tell you. You know what I mean? Like it's I think the comparison is slightly unfair. Once I read a book about how the first telephone worked, I could tell you. So I think if younger generation wants to know where things came from, they can easily find out, especially these days. I mean, man, like things that really at your fingertips, and they do. Um, I was mostly talking about just the like preservation culture in general, that we other industries have to, video games now still keep having these debates that other industries have settled sometimes hundreds of years ago. One of the recent ones, right? I'm going to bring up. I'm sorry, I'm going to catch some shit for this, but like the whole thing about one of the YouTuber did the label restoration for a cartridge thing, and the whole internet exploded. Like, how is this unfair and whatever? I was like, oh man, wait till they found out what they do with paintings. You know what I mean? It's yeah, I don't understand why video games so behind on many things. There's a lot of I mean, I do understand. There's a lot of factors involved and stuff, but yeah. Meanwhile, the history is kind of disappearing while we're having all those ridiculous debates. So that is kind of sad, unfortunately.
That's the thing. I think part of the reason that is disappearing is just because of the speed it's moved. Technology in software has moved on quicker than the technology. The software technology for things like filming and for music and things like that. Video games has come forwards in such a short period of time.
Right.
And it's possible. I don't know for sure, but it's
viewed as disposable as well. Like within the industry, things are viewed as disposable, very much so. Everything has its shelf life, its platform life. Things get absolute very quickly, and nobody thinks it's worth preserving. Well, a lot of people think it's worth preserving, but here's the thing. I'm going to bring up, right out of the gate, we're going to get into some controversial stuff. And here's the thing that I have to put out there. I don't care. So before anybody says anything about trying to convince me, these opinions I've held for a very long time, and so far I have not been proven wrong. So don't write me giant paragraphs of text of why I'm wrong and a terrible person. But we cannot count on any company or corporation to preserve our past. It has never worked out in any of the other mediums and stuff, and we don't have that culture that lets the corporations will start preserving history when we'll put dollars in their hand, right? Yeah. This is the reason when you buy a Blu-ray of a movie from 50 years ago, it has it has whatever is preserved. If there's some behind-the-scenes footage preserved somewhere, someplace, they will dig it out and they'll put it on that Blu-ray, not because they care, not because they want you to see it, not because they think it's culturally important,
because they want your money.
Because you're going to hand over $100 for 50th anniversary, the 75th anniversary edition of The Wizard of Oz. They're going to give you some 8mm footage of some flying monkeys that you've never seen before. And they're going to look for it, and they're going to pay for it, and they're going to pay for the transfer, and that's awesome. It's going to be preserved. The end result is going to get preserved because you pay the money. Now, that does not happen with video games.
No.
Like, at all. In fact, currently, companies do all their best to bury all the most of the archival efforts because they're seen as competition. Even if a company is not willing to put money into re-releasing an old game on the platform through, let's say, emulation. Sometimes that's a lot of money, sometimes it's not, depending on where you end up. But either way, they are more likely to sort of like send the cease and desist to the website that's doing so, because it's unfortunately against the law. And our law doesn't really play into preservation. There's no such thing as abandonware. That's another thing that gets thrown around DOS world a lot. Yeah. Abandonware. Is this abandonware? Is this abandonware? Is so abandonware? Abandonware does not exist legally. That term circulated a lot in the 90s and early 2000s. And I think some people somehow managed to like trick themselves into being like, oh yes, I don't support piracy, but abandonware is fine because the product is no longer being supported. That is not legally the case.
No.
If you're going to say it, name it what it is. It's either software preservation, all right, which implies that we will go against the current laws to preserve history, which is what we should be doing anyway. And try to change the laws to accommodate us for, and B, call it piracy. Like, you can't say one thing isn't piracy, another thing isn't piracy. They're all piracy. But you're doing it for, essentially the greater good. Even if somebody 20 years ago didn't do it for greater good, it did it for money. The byproduct of piracy is always preservation.
It's
It
true.
always happens. Like the reason why we have so many games right now being able to play and have manual scans and whatever, even on places like GOG and Steam, like so many people, so many things of those, like they use like cracked stuff from like 30 years ago and stuff because somebody did it. And yes, so
What's your opinion of things like of sites like Good Old Games, where they are getting a lot of DOS games and quite
good.
often being run by through DOSBox and things like that? So
Yes,
you're buying a game that comes with DOSBox all
I love it.
pre-packaged.
I love it. I have like no need for it, right? For me, it's easy to configure DOSBox and run it, and I have a stack of old games. But games aren't about me. I don't own games, so it's cool to me that somebody who maybe remembers the game that they played 30 years ago can just go on the website, click, pay $4, and play the game. I think that's fair. I think it's great. All GOG's team and .demo before they just took down their servers. But I think altogether it's like under 300 games got preserved, right? Like since they existed, of just DOS variety, right? So we still have thousands and thousands to go. So until that day, I have nothing against GOG and Steam, and I'm super happy that that some companies do agree to re-release their old properties. GOG seemed to unfortunately sort of fall off the whole DOS thing a couple of years ago. Once they sort of like, oh wait, yeah, indie games do sell more. What are we doing? Let's even rename ourselves from Good Old Games to just GOG, and forget about this. But sometimes they do still like, oh yes, we just made a deal with Disney. Here's like 5 more LucasArts games, and they now accept other people like Night Dive Studio comes to them, and now they don't have to secure the rights. Night Dive did it for them, so now you just have to sell it at the storefront. It's all good to me. It's business is business. I understand. It's great that it's available. I support it 100%. Emulation is amazing, but yes,
but
like
it doesn't
in
preserve
the large
everything.
scale of things, yes, this is just a tiny drop. I'm glad that we've moved on from where we were maybe 10 years ago, but we've moving on so slowly. Like so slowly, and while we're moving on and having those other debates, like, is it worth paying $4 for a game that's 30 years old? And none of the original creators get the money, which in most cases is very true. I don't know. Is this a debate worth having? Like, really, is this game worth $4? How much is too much? Like some people, I just saw, what was that? Just a big article came out about the Disney Afternoon Legacy Collection. It's like 4 NES games in like across different platforms, with not many extras and no multiplayer, no whatever. And they're like, is it worth whatever it is? $12? I was like, I think it's really unfair to have that debate, especially at this point. So yes, I guess I do think I bought that collection and played through like entire Chip and Dale 2 in like 20 minutes. Great game. Great game that plays itself basically, very relaxing. But again, while we're having all those sort of debates, things disappearing. Another thing is enthusiasts, right? So we have all kinds of real archivists, kind of. Yeah. I mean, a lot of them are unpaid, and sort of just enthusiasts maintaining those abandonware websites. Where a lot of those people also go out and spend their own money buying like tracking down. There's some kind of game that thought to be lost on an eBay auction in Spain, but the seller will not ship outside of Spain, so they like go like 5 people from 5 different countries to just like chain send it back, and they scan it. So those people do invest a lot of their own money into this and stuff. But we cannot rely on unpaid enthusiasts to preserve our history for us. Again, we have an entirety of our history to prove otherwise. And I also don't understand this internal culture of like people just like snobbing away at each other. Like a lot of people we only now see the rise of very, very few real video game academics, right? Historians, like real video game historians, actually certified video game historians and stuff like that. So there's a lot of pushback towards them. There is from modern gamers, because corporations cultivated that sort of like giant anti-piracy stance where they lap everything together. So there's a big sort of pushback towards software preservation from just the regular sort of everyday users and stuff like that. And archivists don't like sometimes don't like the enthusiasts don't like archivists, and it's like, again, there's this giant sort of like this uh, and meanwhile, history is disappearing. As sad as it is, like I used to be so enthusiastic about software preservation, and it's great. We are moving giant strides, but like every time, which now seems to be very, very open, because everything is out on the internet, right? Everything, like everybody's sort of like posting their opinions on Twitter. Things are like much more in your face what everybody thinks. So like now that I see all of this, like every month, I'm like, oh, not this again. Like, why are we arguing about all this stuff? Like, we should be working together.
It's difficult because
there's so many elements involved.
Oh yeah. Well, when you think about preserving culture in general, if it's Italian culture or American culture or European culture, typically there is some kind of localization where a government or something can fund towards that preservation. But when you're talking about something as international and global as video games, there isn't one place that would be responsible for it. So
Right.
having that funding for it needs to come from somewhere.
Yeah, we don't. Yes, the funding has to happen. First of all, like, we need actual paid historians to do this. Like, paid and trained historians, not some fucker off the street. Not me either. Like, I always say, people sometimes like, oh, Anatoly is a video game historian. I am not a historian. I know real historians. I'm not it. I'm just some asshole on the internet. And we need people and organizations. And I know certain organizations established, certain organizations sometimes containing just one person, really. But it's like, it's fine. It's still moving towards the goal and stuff too. And of course, there is also documentation and just actual archiving. So for now, most of what we're doing is, a lot of it is just like dumping stuff in, which is good. Save everything you can. People, if you are sitting on some floppies in your home and you have, somebody who has an access to a drive that can read them, please, like, back them up, send everything, because like we're talking about games here. Games are like the most preserved thing right now. Games is disappearing, and a lot of them have disappeared, but they're the most preserved in the world of PC, right? Edutainment games, not so much. But the worst, productivity software. Like, a lot of it is, we don't know where it is. We knew it existed at one point, and maybe even a pirated version that's been like cut to shreds is available somewhere, someplace for download. But like floppy disk images or anything, original versions, manuals, boxes, gone. Nobody cared about productivity software.
And they degrade because the floppies just lying around. So many of them now are unreadable. It just is due to environmental effect on them and things like that. Right. It's sad when that just goes.
But my personal opinion is, like, to people watching right now, I'm going to look in the camera. If you're sitting on something, and if you can, just dump it and upload it. Internet Archive right now is not going anywhere. Probably the least likely thing to go down. You can upload it. You can just, they're kind of DMCA exempt in a way. So if you're bothered by doing something, it's technically against the law. That's that. But again, like, if you back up a copy of old software from 20 years ago, the chances are that that's the reason why we're going to have it 10 years from now. So, that's the little part that anyone, I think, can do. Who, like, you don't even have to be a super technical thing. Things are very sort of accessible these days. Yeah. And if you don't know how to figure it out, going through a few people, I'm sure, will lead you to someone who can do it for you.
I think a lot of people these days would kind of think about why do we need to do this? Why do we need to preserve this stuff? And I think it's important to note that if people don't have access to this stuff, if people don't see where the roots came from, if you look at a very basic video game, that teaches someone how to start and where those beginnings come from. And people can learn from those beginnings to create better software and to develop more software. things like old productivity, although it may not be relevant for now, in 5 years again, it may become relevant again. And actually, having that there means we can extrapolate from it and make things in the future and learn where we came from as a software journey.
It's that, but a lot of it is, not only just practical but also cultural, right? And also we also do have examples. Like, I mean, there's what, like 1% of films preserved until like 1940 something,
Yeah.
because we just didn't care. So all those works, like early works that we knew existed, uh, in the 20s and 30s. I mean, yes, they finally dug up a copy of like semi-full version of Metropolis, right? Like 5 years ago, from like buried in the basement in Argentina or something like that, I think, right? But and until then, we like didn't know what the hour of that movie looked like. Until now, like 100 years ago, like what, 90? How many years ago? Something, almost 100.
Yeah.
Or is it 100 already? No, it's not. But we're
don't.
almost like 5 years away from 100. But either way, like that, and like 80s direct-to-video movies, most of those are gone. Like, they are also gone. It's not just 100 years ago. It's also relatively just around the corner. We're making the same mistakes again and again and again, and you'd think that by like the 50th time we made that mistake that we would learn, but no. Like, even in the entertainment, let's lump video games together with the entertainment industry, right? So that just like the last 100 years of things actually being recorded, right? It sort of fits in with that same theme. We still made the same mistake several times already.
Yeah.
So that's that. So like, yes, like we have all the evidence to show us that things are disappearing and will disappear even more if we just don't hurry up, essentially. So,
yeah. So I mean, obviously, preserving software in general is something you're extremely passionate about. Where did this passion come from? Where is this love and passion come from? Is this just something you've just always had, or?
It's because it's because I like DOS games, and like when I became older, I was like, oh man, I can't find any. It's like, and eventually that's where the awareness comes from. Like, eventually just like sort of understand, like, I like games not because I just like to play them as entertainment, but I also recognize the medium. I always did from very early on. Like, certain games are very inspirational to me when I was very young. In a way, same thing with cinema, even Hollywood, right? It's sort of it's conveyor belt structure. We still consider it capable of art. Not every film is art, or is it? But it's the same thing. I don't see it as being disposable. I see it being capable of art, and also as a reflection of culture, time, and place where those things were developed. As well as just historical record of everything. So like, I always looked at the medium that way, and when I became older and I realized that what scale is, because when you're young you're like, well, when you're young you don't really care about anything, and everything is like whatever, it's right here. I have a CD full of DOS games, like I see like I bought on the Russian pirate market that had like 125 games on it. That's great. That's awesome. That's great. But then you became older. You like, when you become older, you look at the CD, be like, oh, that's not quite enough, and not in the shape and form that I would like it to be, in order to actually represent, the sort of the full sort of experience of that product.
Huh.
So just once I got older and sort of understand how fast things are disappearing in general, and how fast things are disappearing in the medium that's one of my favorites. That's just essentially what drives the passion, I guess. And I don't really do much about it. There's very few things that I've preserved there, because unfortunately it also takes money and time and a lot of other things, like a lot more dedication than a person like me can muster. But other people doing great work and stuff. So most of the time I'm just an observer to that happening, and I'll play the part when I can, like as much as I can, I guess. But yeah, like my passion is I would like more people to talk about it, and that's why I talk about it often, because like I mostly just started a conversation. I started a conversation DOS games. That's about conversation about preserving DOS software. So other people might sort of realize the same thing, and maybe they have more drive and resources, and like they can also contribute.
So when you got to the point as an adult where you suddenly went, oh, I really want to play some old DOS games, were there specific games that you played as your childhood that you wanted to go and find and found that you couldn't? Or
No, here's the thing. I never actually stopped. That's the thing. It's not like I stopped playing DOS games and one day I was like, I wonder what it would be like to play Doom today. No, I've been playing Doom since I don't know, for at least 20 years, like weekly. So
cool.
uh, you got to remember in the late 90s, Windows still ran DOS games just fine.
Yeah.
The Windows, the 32-bit. It's only when we switched to NT when they merged with XP. I guess 2000, but nobody cared, right? The Windows XP was like the first big popular one that was built on top of NC, but that still could kind of run. Most DOS games did run on it. Like you would need the NCVDM, but you could still run. And then we started crossing over into the DOSBox territory, right? So like, and of course for the very few games out there that were open source, there were source ports. So like, I've never actually stopped playing DOS games, which is why I always wanted to talk to people about them.
Yeah.
But now we're in this position where nobody needs to like jump through many hoops or whatever. DOSBox is accessible, and now again there's services that just bundle stuff with it pre-configured, and you can pay a couple of dollars and get the game. It's great.
So what kept you with DOS games in particular? I mean, I'm assuming that you've played stuff that is not DOS and more up-to-date releases, but what kept you coming back to DOS games in particular?
Well, number one, and the biggest factor is probably being poor. So that's, I think, contributes to a lot of Eastern Bloc people, where it's like technology is so far behind there, like people still play on like 486s in like 1995. You know what I mean? So that is a big factor for many people, I'm sure. And then just familiarity and like ease of access. I could, in the 90s, I could save 100 rubles and go and buy a CD that had, let's say, a pirated version of Quake 2, or I could spend the same 100 rubles and get the CD with 250 DOS games. So sometimes I bought Quake 2 and sometimes I didn't.
Yeah.
So there is that. So that's basically it. I never stop. What keeps me coming back? I don't know. I don't play games as much as I used to. All right. I know people do. My Steam library is almost 500 titles, which is scary. But like, I think my most played game in it is like 38 hours. And I know I've seen some of my friends, like one of my friends has like 2,000 hours in like Binding of Isaac. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know how and when I would be able to do that, but it's like, and I do play a bunch of new games. I mostly play indie games, but I play like new releases when I can. I just got a new PC, so I like been playing a couple of games from the last couple of years that I wasn't unable to play before. Like I played the new Doom and like Alien Isolation. So like I do try to check out games that I think would be interesting, but to me, because I have this project going and everything, and just because there is something about old games, right? I do get a lot of those comments being like, "Oh, DOS games are crap," and it's like, well, you know what? A lot of games are crap. Like a lot of games, that's a great conversation starter. Two of my favorite things that the new follower will do. Yeah, I'm all for nostalgia, but DOS games are crap. And B, it was better on the Amiga. Like the two of them, like, great, thanks. Like those are the two like most absolutely wrong conversation starters with me.
Yeah.
Because I don't have anywhere nice to go after either of those. But where was I going with this? What were we just talking about 2 sentences ago?
Well, what I wanted to kind of get to is you keep coming back to DOS as obviously DOS nostalgia is your brand and your channel, but for personal reasons, and it's just sort of why that in particular. And I think that makes sense what you're saying in terms of it's been a long part of your life that you've stuck with, and you do still play modern games. It's not that you ignore that, but it's just that there's a lot of passion there that you stuck with for a very, very long time.
Right. So this is what I wanted to make. So the story. So yeah, and yes, that's true. A lot of DOS games are crap. Now, a lot of games in general are crap. That's just
Yeah.
how it works. But something about DOS games particularly, being an open platform, right? Not really limited to like manufacturing of cartridges or anything, and also spanning a big chunk of generations because like it's not something like you have 3 versions of the Amiga and then the company dies and it's just that proprietary architecture just stays there. You know, IBM PC clones are still around. We still use them. I think that's also partly the reason why, in some reason, in retro gaming circles, a lot of the times PC gaming is not recognized as retro, and it's really weird to me. But to hear some people do that, but it does happen. I think it's partially had to do with the reason, like, oh, listen, I'm using a PC right now. It didn't go away. What's so retro about it? But
Yeah.
of course, that's not the case. There's so many like evolutions of hardware that we went through. There's like more. You open like one of those scans of like a Byte magazine from the 80s, and you'll see hardware there that you didn't even knew existed. That I think existed for maybe a month or two. But because it falls into this thing where anybody could make something, right? We also go into this shareware sort of boom in the post 80s, right? Like early 90s. And technology is still very limited. I mean, PCs were never really designed to be played games on. They were business machines, first and foremost, for a long time. So limitation breeds creativity, right? So a lot of those programmers and artists had to work within a very sort of with a very limited parameters of what they could do. But like a lot of them, because they were young and because they were determined and because they loved technology and stuff like this, like managed to like push those limited abilities to somewhere somewhere incredible, right? Like I'm going to bring up one actually specific example. I don't like to bring up specific examples when I talk about this, but like one of the games that's very influential to me is Another World, right? Also known as Out of This World in the States. I hate that title. That's like something like a hippie would say, right? Sounds like, oh, it's out of this world. But another world, like I will never forget the first time I saw it, like the opening and intro to that game. Like I was at the friend's house and we just like, oh, it's called, here's a pirated game. It was on the floppy, it was written Another, I think. And we just ran another.com or is it, oh, it's .exe, I think. And like I saw that intro, like just first opening sequence of like car pulling up and stuff, and Lester coming out of the car, and like already there, like my mind was blown. Like that game is just so like to this day, it's super effective, and I'm glad that it's available on just about everything these days. Like I can play it on the phone; it actually works pretty great. So like that game originally made for Amiga, but the DOS version was expanded by the original author. So like that, you didn't think something like this was possible when that game came out.
Yeah.
Not so much because of the technological standpoint of view. I mean, yes, it's sort of vector polygon technology was certainly rare at the time, but it's not like super hardcore programmed thing. You know, from technical point of view, it's not like it's squeezing you. Like it works fine on like a 286. You know, it doesn't need anything like it's not super resource hungry, but it's because this game wants to be cinematic and also wants to be mature and wants to, without any dialogue or HUD, like Eric Chahi made the decision to connect with the player emotionally, and he thought he had enough of this limited technology to sort of make that decision a reality, and it works. I mean, like I remember the first time also finishing it and like getting teary-eyed at that final sequence and stuff, and the game has no HUD, nothing. It's controlled by a joystick and a button, or 4 keys and one enter space, whatever, like a 5-key game. It's absolutely incredible to see something like this done in that time. And we see a lot less of it now for obvious reasons. Trust me, I'm not the one to say modern games are bad, not at all. Times are different.
Well, but that's the thing. It's a lot of actually the more successful indie games are going back to that simpler dynamic.
I don't think they're going back as too much. So they're working with the same sort of structure. Like a lot of people always, I mean, not always, but a lot of people like shit on pixel art and stuff. But it's like, I think just people don't understand that you cannot produce modern day quality console graphics with like one person.
Yeah.
Like, it's just the reason the graphics were like that back in the day. Yes, VGA only gave you 256 colors on screen at the same time in 320 by 200. Most let's say most popular video mode, right? In the early 90s. So yes, it was a technical limitation, but also, one or two guys could do it. Today, yes, you have those nearly unlimited capabilities, but one or two guys cannot do it. Like, there's a reason.
Not without a 20-year budget to do so.
Right, and like $100 million. I mean, you look at the credits for the modern games, and you like the artist.
It's huge.
The list is just like scrolls by, and you're like, and you look at the in-game models, and you're like, oh my god, somebody spent like at least 3 days modeling a chair. Like this in the indie world, that's not going to happen. So what people are going to do, what they're capable of. So a lot of it is not technical restriction, of course, but mostly time and money concern, and also because they were inspired by those games as well. So it's just the combined sort of the inspirations and the technical necessity. Again, like, it's making you work within a certain set of limitations, but you can also see how far you can push it.
Yeah. I recently played a game called The Fall, which is a side-scrolling platform game by a Canadian indie developer called Over the Moon. And it gave me a lot of familiar feelings to Flashback, which obviously was a DOS game in a similar kind of way, side-scrolling, and like you're saying, things like Another World, where you've got that serious plot, adult plot, and things like that. And
Right.
And I wonder if there's a certain amount of correlation between the limitations you have in terms of software and like you say, it breeds creativity. It means people go, I've got this amount of space where I can work in. How can I push this to be the best game it can be?
That's right. And that's what I think was the case with DOS games back in the day. And many, not just DOS games, but generally games back in the day when technology was so limited. And indie games today, where people don't have the resources necessary to sort of like to produce big budget games. So they create those restrictions for themselves, essentially, or those restrictions are there, for them, if it's like a budgetary concern and stuff like this. But it doesn't mean that they have to limit themselves creatively, like in that way. So yeah, a lot of, and when you can produce good graphics, what can you do? I mean, nobody's stopping you for thinking about your design a lot. So, and that's what a lot of crappy DOS games. But if you look at a lot of like old DOS games that are actually good, yes, a lot of time like graphics are beautiful for the time that they came out, and right. But a lot of those games have like really interesting design choices that shape the industry, choices that change the industry, or not really choices that just refined something that we had. But there's the most memorable DOS games I always feel are there because of their design. So yeah, same thing today. I think indie games are very capable of changing stuff and sort of like doing new and interesting things.
Well, you've got things like Fez, which obviously not only ended up capturing a lot of people's imagination, but
Fez is technically not quite an indie game. But
not quite.
But it is made by like two people. So.
Exactly, but but it was also it's a very simple game visually,
and beautiful.
Oh yeah, very much so. But it not only captured people in terms of a storyline, the gameplay, but then went on to do things like had a film revolving around it, like a feature-length documentary, and got people thinking about kind of indie games, even though it wasn't strictly an indie game. But I just think that there are a lot of indies now. Binding of Isaac is another great example where people have jumped onto it and taken this really arguably simple game it's visually definitely but it's become something much more powerful than that. It's become something that has a fan base that is rabid, even though there are games like the Elder Scrolls series and stuff like that, which
Right,
are
right.
pumping out these huge titles, and Call of Duty
Right.
186
I,
and
I
whatever.
was
It's like,
actually I was actually trying to remember that RPG from a couple of years ago that was like that you could do like a piece run through of and
Undertale.
yes, like Undertale broke a lot of new ground.
Yeah.
And yes, never mind, people freaked out over it, but it's unfortunately, but like that is an indie game that like I legitimately feel like did a lot of new stuff.
Yeah.
Like
And caused a lot
like
of emotion as well. People,
yeah,
for a game that especially at first glance seems very basic and
yes,
silly.
until you actually start playing and then replaying because it's built around being replayed.
Yeah.
Like it remembers your playthroughs. Like one playthrough through Undertale is not enough. You have to play more and make different decisions that are different to your previous decisions.
Yeah.
And then you watch how the game reacts. That's great. Like that's uh, fantastic. I mean, it probably has been done before in one way or the other, because that's another thing that I learned about dealing with video game history. Always like second, third guess everything and double check everything. Most of the time, when like never trust anything when it's like, oh, this so and so was the first. The chances that it's been done like a couple years prior and nobody cared.
Yeah.
And also the dates are and everything is always wrong. So video game history is unfortunately not preserved at all. There's like all the references and books like I've written from like the same sources most of the time. So most of the time we just like keep repeating the same mistakes over and over in different sources, and that's very unfortunate. But yeah, like I feel like a lot of indie games are capable and are and will sort of break new ground because of it, because it's easier to experiment when you only have, well, no, I shouldn't say it, like all those people have a lot at stake, and it's money, and they also need to eat, I'm sure. So
Of course.
personally, of course, there's a lot of involved, but it's still, I think it's easy to experiment if you're two guys with $2,000 than when you are 250 guys with $200 million.
And you're not accountable to a large overarching publisher or investors who are going, well, you have to make something that's commercially successful,
right.
and
So
you have.
I want Call of Duty meets BioShock Infinite with some Doom thrown in like that. There's like and then like a team of 200 people goes to work on it for like 2 years, and they all like hate each other. It's by the end of it, like yes, like there's a lot less possibility to experiment when you are given such sort of like market, essentially market terms to make your game buy. Like it's easier for you to sit down and be like, oh, what if it's a team party based RPG, but you don't kill anybody, you just give everybody flowers, and actually you play as the Beatles. Well, you can't do that, but legally. But like like that's like the sort of stuff that you can think of and make if you're one guy or two people, or like.
I also wonder if part of the reason that the indie developers end up in that scenario is because we have a lot of that DOS software, which has strong modding communities and sort of communities that have sort of deconstructed a lot of those DOS games, and you can see a lot of the programming and follow those steps rather than suddenly being given the Unreal 4 engine and going, great, start learning. It's so much to take in one go. You could go back to Doom and look at the source code for Doom and go, oh, well, that's how this works. This is how they created vector drawings. This is how they created simple polygons. And like you can learn the basics before you go on to create these big AAA titles, and I think that's maybe why a lot of indie developers start with that simple style, with that DOS-esque aesthetic, because it's easier to get started there and easier to get a learning process going.
Yeah, I agree, and I think maybe some of them did start on DOS. I mean, DOS. Let's face it. Like, I mean, like, if I wanted to, if it was, let's say, the year was 1994, and I wanted to be like, oh, I would like to make a game on the Super Nintendo. Whoops. But if I wanted to make a game for PC in 1994, I mean, I legitimately could. And there were tools, and if I didn't know how to program and stuff, I mean, I could read a book. I could actually get one of the books, read the book, and actually program a game
Yeah.
for a PC by myself in 1994. But let's say what I could do in like 1996, let's say when Duke Nukem 3D came around, right? That was the game that bundled its editor and documentation on the CD, so I could make my own maps and stuff.
Yeah.
And like it was the same tools that developers themselves were using, not the fan created tools like let's say we had in Doom. So yes, I think there was a lot of opportunity to sort of start there, and once you got older,
When me and my brother were little, we had two 386 Packard Bell PCs that we had side by side, serial cabled up, and we used to play Doom Deathmatch and put on. It was the time of sort of early '90s grunge, so we put on like Alice in Chains or whatever, and play Doom against each other 1-on-1 matches and things. And after doing that for a while, you start to want to change it up, and we started going through computer magazines and ordering out of codes upon codes in the back of these magazines, floppy disks to be posted to us with modifications for Doom. So we had like different all the things that you'd load in like 10 floppy disks and it would change all the image files for the guns. And you'd have like another 10 floppy disks. It's like a wad pack of maps. Nice. And we started doing that, and then we started doing things like you'd look at the way they've done it, and it's like, well, wait a minute, these are BMP files. I can alter these BMP files and create my own like images to go on top of the guns. So we started doing that. We started creating our own editors, and then we got things like the map builders, and we started creating our own maps and changing the textures to create our own deathmatch arenas and things where we could play against each other and have fun. And I think that's where I would say mainly of our kind of generation, where a lot of people would have started out looking at that and then going, well, what's next? When can I start? And people started doing things like they're changing the way the camera works. So like third-person cameras for Doom and Wolfenstein and things like that. And they learn a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And I think that's a great way to lead your way in to becoming a game developer. And that gives me hope for indies in the future. And I think that's another reason why having that preservation of DOS and that appreciation of where it came from can really serve where the future goes as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm just all for accessibility for many reasons. And in fact, not just from learning history, but just to be like, I was once young and I discovered Day of the Tentacle, right? And I played it and it's great and it's hilarious. And I think it's absolutely amazing that a 15-year-old somewhere can go on their PS4 right now and play the new version of Day of the Tentacle. They can pay whatever it is, $8, $9, and they can experience it for the first time, maybe in a slightly different form, but essentially almost in the same way as I have experienced it back then. Yeah. And maybe they'll feel the same way I did about it. That's great. I don't find anything wrong with that. Like, I am all for the availability. Commercial availability. Again, commercialism is what will drive preservation further. Yeah. Always. That's where you get the funding. Yes, part of it is eventually, hopefully, we'll get some kind of a historical funds established around the world, and there'll be actual organizations, and everybody will paid, and we'll all live in utopia and have, no worries about healthcare or wages or taxes.
We can hope.
Amazing, but until that day, those little like commercial steps are good for the industry. We have a lot of other things to worry about. We have a lot of other things to sort of figure out with preservation, but the little that there is certainly good. Yeah. So I went on this big rant before. I would just want to clarify, like, I love all the movements towards it. Like, I am not against anything at all. I just think
you haven't come across as such. So you're
right. I hope so. I feel
from my perspective, no, you sound passionate. You sound great. I'm not hearing anything that should be controversial. Like what you're saying makes sense to me completely. I don't think you need to worry.
I'm just disappointed that that the speed of it, when we have so many examples from the past of things disappearing, we're kind of moving very slowly
Yeah.
while things is but all this other stuff is great. Like again, enthusiasts backing things up, great. Uh, Commercial releases of old games through companies and studios, great. Academics actually majoring in video game history and actually doing their work, great. All of that is great, and that's where we need to go.
So for people who obviously people can interact with you on Twitter and they can check out your YouTube channel. I'll be putting links to your website and all of those bits and pieces down below, as well as some preservation sites and things like that. So if you want to check out DOS Nostalgia, DOS Nostalgic, and Anatoly's bits and pieces, you can look at all those links. Are there other things that you want people to particularly look at, or anything in particular that people should look at if they want an example of what you do?
No, not really. I mean, like Twitter is, like I said previously, Twitter is where I'm most active at, and that's where the easiest way to contact with me and talk to me is to share your story. Tweet me your DOS story, how you've first seen Doom, of how I don't know, your mother got angry and took your floppies away from you or something. Yeah, like all of that stuff I love and I want to hear. So that's Twitter, and of course YouTube is probably the second one. There's been a bit of a slowdown recently of how much I put out. Unfortunately, I got a new job and other things kind of getting in the way. I'm trying to sort it out as fast as possible. But YouTube is like where I put out things. I have like little tidbits here and there, like videos of demos and logos and whatever. But like
You've got a lot of archive videos on your YouTube channel. There's there's a lot of content on there of games that are very recognizable, like Doom and Commander Keen and so on and so forth. But
like I
there's
do
some rare
reviews and
stuff on there as well.
but it's like, yeah, I do reviews, and now that I've got a new PC, mostly actually with intention to do video editing, be able to do video editing without jumping through 10 million hoops, because I used to work on a machine that was like over a decade old, and that eventually got me to the point where I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. But also now I'm sort of capable of streaming, so once I sort of figure, like a time frame, I do want to stream more. But yeah, on my YouTube channel, I got this compilation videos that I put out once a year of DOS games from 20 and 25 years ago. That people seem to enjoy those a lot. So it's like hour-long videos of just like games from like 1992, 1993, and stuff like that. So yeah, check those out. I also have a podcast that's available on iTunes, and I'm trying to get it on Stitcher, but not yet. But iTunes and just the RSS website. Just whatever you can Google or use a search engine of your choice to find DOS Nostalgia. It's me. That's where I'm at.
Most of it's all findable via his website as well, which is www.dosnostalgia.com. Yeah, thank you so much for coming onto the show and having a chat with me. And yeah,
very welcome. It was a pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. I don't know if you could tell.
No, your passion is evident. That's part of the reason I do this show is to talk to people who are passionate about what they love. And so yeah, thank you very much, and I'll see you again soon.
All right, take care and goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.